Good afternoon and welcome to the Daily News Analysis by Civil Service Institute, Pala. We'll be looking at the top stories from July 3rd and July 4th. Since we didn't have Daily News Analysis yesterday, we'll be also looking at the top stories from yesterday's newspaper. 4 red lines in India-US trade talks: corn, ethanol, soybean, and dairy. There will be a successor. Trust sole authority, says Dalai Lama. Iran halts cooperation with IAEA, demands guarantee for nuclear sites. Ministry defers forest land node for Puri Airport. Cites concern over olive ridley turtles and migratory birds. Custodial deaths. Police convictions remain zero in Tamil Nadu and beyond. No link between COVID-19 vaccines and sudden deaths. Researchers sequence whole genome of ancient Egyptian for the first time. Union government to gather support to remove Justice 𝗗𝗂𝘆𝑆. Endocrine disruptors in plastic waste, a new public health threat. Can the Supreme Court halt an act passed by a state? Moving on to the news in detail. Here, 4 red lines in India-US trade talks: corn, ethanol, soybean, and dairy. As you all know, India is presently engaged in a trade talk with the United States of America. United States President Donald Trump has said his administration is going to open up India, where we are able to go in and compete with much less tariffs, he said. India has maintained that the agriculture and dairy are its red lines. The said trade talk could weaken our agriculture and also our farmers' position. Opening up imports of 4 farm products is politically fraught. It involves farmers across several states and calls for a relook at key policies regarding regulation around genetically modified crops. So the 4 red lines basically includes corn, that is maize, ethanol, soybean, and dairy. On these, India imposes both tariff and non-tariff restrictions, and the US is pushing for greater market access. So, regarding corn, the US is the world's biggest maize producer and exporter. Around 94% of the total area of the United States last year was planted with corn, that too genetically modified varieties. These genetically modified varieties incorporate alien genes from bacteria that code for proteins enabling the crop to tolerate application of herbicides such as glyphosate and glufosinate and resist attacks by specific insect pests. India charges around 15% duty on maize, and additionally, beyond the limit, we attract a higher tariff of up to 50% rate. Moreover, India neither grows nor allows import of genetically modified maize. One proposal mooted is to permit import of genetically modified maize exclusively for use as a feedstock to manufacture fuel ethanol. Over 46% of the ethanol being made available by Indian distilleries for blending with petrol is in fact currently coming from corn, that is maize. Maize is largely a feed grain supplying carbohydrates, the principal source of energy for poultry and livestock. Restricting the use of imported genetically modified maize only to milling and the fermentation of its starchy carbohydrates into fuel ethanol is meant to prevent this material from entering the food chain. The milk, egg, or chicken consumed in India will then not come from the cattle and birds fed on GM maize, whether imported from US or Brazil. But the proposal faces resistance from sugar mills. The share of ethanol supplied from grain-based feedstock has increased from 0 to 57% between 2017-18 to 2023-24. The mills fear that imported genetically modified corn will lead to further marginalization of sugarcane in the ethanol blended petrol program. States like Bihar, which is going to polls in the coming months, along with other largest maize producer states like Karnataka and Madhya Pradesh, will create a political roadblock. The second is ethanol. The US is the world's biggest producer and exporter of ethanol too, with India being US's third largest market. India now allows ethanol imports only for non-fuel industrial purposes. Imports can be used for manufacturing alcohol-based chemicals, medicines, or beverages, but not for blending in petrol and diesel. The import of ethanol for fuel use is likely to be a red line for India. It may be seen as undermining the ethanol blended petrol program's primary objective, that is to reduce dependence on imported fuels and create a market for surplus domestic agricultural produce, particularly sugarcane and cereal grains. Coming to soya bean, the US is the second biggest producer and exporter of soya bean after Brazil. Both United States of America and Brazil cultivates genetically modified varieties of soya bean that is herbicide tolerant. India allows import of genetically modified soya bean oil. Please note that we only allow import of genetically modified soya bean oil. However, imports of both whole GM soya bean and the residual de-oiled cake, that is DOC, after extraction of oil are prohibited. The reason is that the GM protein matter is present only in the raw bean and the de-oiled cake and not in the soya bean oil. It is only present, the genetically modified protein content is only present in the raw bean and the de-oiled cake and not in the oil. A recent Niti Aayog working paper had called for exploring the option of importing GM soya bean so that the oil extracted can be sold in the domestic market and the de-oiled cake exported to other countries. This would ensure that only the oil gets consumed locally and the imported soya bean is neither planted by Indian farmers nor used as an animal feed ingredient. But this can also cause political turmoil, especially in the BJP-ruled states of Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, and Rajasthan, the largest soybean growers in India. Plus, the crop is being sold at below the government's minimum support price currently. This may not make it politically easy to permit imports of GM soybean. And the last is our dairy sector. The US isn't a big player when it comes to dairy products. Dairy sector is led by New Zealand and other European Union countries. The duties that India currently levies, 30% on cheese, 40% on butter, and 60% on milk powder, render imports from even low-cost producers such as New Zealand and Australia unviable. On top of that is the requirement which the United States has claimed is purely premised on religious and cultural grounds for all imported dairy products to be derived from animals, not fed on any formulation produced from the internal organs, blood meal, or tissues of bovines. While dairy is clearly a red line on which India is unlikely to yield much ground, it may also turn out to be a leveraging point that the United States would use to extract concessions in the other agricultural commodities. So let's wait and watch how the US-India trade deal is carried off. Moving on to the next news, there will be a successor. Trust will be the sole authority, says Dalai Lama. Ending the speculation on whether he would have a successor, the 14th Dalai Lama said on Wednesday that the centuries-old institution of the Dalai Lama would continue and the Gyadan Phodrang Trust, a non-profit organization that his office set up in 2011, would have the sole authority to recognize his reincarnation. China rejected the succession plan and reiterated that any future heir must receive its seal of approval. It also said that the Dalai Lama's reincarnation must follow the principles of domestic recognition, the Golden Urn process, and approval by the central government in line with the religious traditions and laws. Over the last 14 years, leaders of the Tibet's spiritual traditions, members of the Tibetan Parliament in exile, participants in a special general body meeting, members of the Central Tibetan Administration, NGOs, Buddhists from the Himalayan region, especially Mongolia, and other Buddhist republics of the Russian Federation and Buddhist in Asia, including mainland China, have written to Dalai Lama with reasons earnestly requesting that the institution of Dalai Lama should continue. So here we have to look at what does 𝗗𝗏𝗄𝗃 Trust means. The meaning of the term 𝗗𝗏𝗄𝗃 refers to the residential quarters of the Dalai Lama in line with the second Dalai Lama onwards, referring to the revered monastery in Tibet. After the Potala Palace was built by the fifth Dalai Lama, the Dalai Lamas moved away from these quarters and stayed at the Potala Palace in winter and Norbullinka, built by the seventh Dalai Lama about 100 years after Potala in summer. This tradition was followed until the 14th Dalai Lama's escape from Lhasa to India in March 1959. The 𝗗𝗏𝗄𝗃 Trust is one of the three institutions associated with the Dalai Lama. There are three registered institutions that are related to His Holiness, the Dalai Lama. They are 𝗗𝗏𝗄𝗃 Trust, which is registered body in India and operates from the office of His Holiness in 𝗗𝗏𝗃. There is another Dalai Lama Trust, which too is a non-profit organization, and the third is 𝗗𝗏𝗄𝗃 Foundation, which is registered in Zurich, Switzerland. The 𝗗𝗏𝗄𝗃 Trust was registered in 2011 in Dharamshala with the aim of recognizing the reincarnation of the Dalai Lama. Iran's president orders country to suspend cooperation with United Nations nuclear watchdog IAEA. Iran's president on Wednesday ordered the country to suspend its cooperation with the International Atomic Energy Agency after American and Israeli airstrikes hit its most important nuclear facilities, likely further limiting inspectors' ability to track Iran's nuclear program that had been enriching uranium to near weapons-grade level. Iran has limited IAEA inspections in the past as a pressure tactic in negotiating with the West. Though as of right now, Tehran has denied that there is any immediate plans to resume talks with the United States that had been appended by the 12-day Iran-Israel war. It wasn't immediately clear what this would mean for the Vienna-based nuclear watchdog, United Nations nuclear watchdog, International Atomic Energy Agency. The agency long has monitored Iran's nuclear program and said that it was waiting for an official communication from the Iranian government. Iran's decision drew an immediate condemnation from Israel. The move so far stops short of what experts feared the most. They had been concerned that Tehran, in response to the war, could decide to fully end its cooperation with the IAEA and abandon the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and rush toward a bomb. The treaty has countries agree not to build or obtain nuclear weapons and allow the IAEA to conduct regular inspections to verify that the countries correctly declare their program. So Iran in 2015 nuclear deal allowed. The 2015 nuclear deal with America allowed Iran to enrich uranium up to 3.67%, enough to fuel a nuclear power plant, but far below the threshold of 90% needed for weapons-grade uranium. It also drastically reduced Iran's stockpile of uranium, limited its use of centrifuges, and relied on the IAEA to oversee Tehran's compliance through additional oversight. The IAEA served as the main assessor of Iran's commitment to the deal. But when Trump first came in 2018, that is, during his first term of presidency, unilaterally withdrew Washington from the accord, insisting it wasn't tough enough and didn't address Iran's missile program or its support for militant groups in the Middle East. That set in motion years of tensions, including attacks at sea and land. Iran had been enriching up to 60%, a short technical step away from weapons grade level. It also has enough of a stockpile to build multiple nuclear bombs if it wanted to. Iran has long insisted its nuclear program is for peaceful purposes, but the IAEA, Western intelligence agencies, and others say Tehran had an organized weapons program up until 2003. Ministry defers forest land note for Puri Airport, cites concerns over olive redleaf turtles' migratory birds. The Environment Ministry's Forest Advisory Committee has deferred its clearance for the proposed international airport in Odisha's Puri, citing its regional office's concern about potential harm to olive redleaf turtles, Irrawaddy dolphins, and migratory birds, along with the impact of the loss of almost 13,000 trees that protect the coastline from cyclones. Keeping in view the concerns raised with regard to the migration routes, threats and conservation requirements of olive redleaf turtles, Irrawaddy dolphins along the Puri coast, and migratory birds coming to Chilka Lake. The regional office also raised concerns about the cutting of 13,000 trees, mostly casuarina, cashew, acacia, and other trees, which would remove a natural shield against cyclones in Puri. In detailed inspection, the potential risk also included turtle nesting sites in Brahmagiri Forest Division adjoining the project site, but also lakhs of migratory birds that visit the Chilka Estuarine Lake. Chilka Estuarine Lake is part of the Central Asian Flyway. Central Asian Flyway is one among the world's 9 migratory flyways. It is used by lakhs of birds, especially water birds. The flyway links the northernmost breeding grounds of Siberia in Russia to South Asia and West Asia. India is a critical and crucial stopover site for these birds. So this underlines Odisha's ecological diversity and the need to conserve the state's pristine environment, flora, and fauna. This article is from the data point of the Hindu, dated 3rd July. Custodial deaths, police convictions remain zero in Tamil Nadu and beyond. Dalits are disproportionately targeted for police brutality in Tamil Nadu. Worryingly, those belonging to scheduled caste often bear the brunt of custodial torture. A significant number of custodial deaths takes place, of which a considerable number of them are reported. A few of the policemen are arrested and none of them are convicted. Data show that Tamil Nadu has a long history of police brutality. According to data from Parliament, 490 deaths were reported while suspects were in judicial or police custody between 2016 to 2022. In the past 6 years, Uttar Pradesh reported the highest number of fatalities in judicial police custody among all the states, while Tamil Nadu reported the highest number among the southern states. In total, around 12,000 deaths were recorded in India in the period considered. It is important to note that not all custody deaths are due to police excesses. So convictions of the state police personnel have been rare, not just in the case of custodial deaths, but also in any human rights violations case. This article and the data given can be used in GS4, that is the ethics paper, as an example of rule of law. It shows how governance requires ethical balancing between public safety and individual rights while respecting human dignity even in challenging situations. No link between COVID-19 vaccines and sudden deaths. Sudden cardiac deaths can be from a wide range of factors, including genetics, lifestyle, pre-existing conditions, and post-COVID-19 complications, says the Union Health Ministry. The ministry added that this conclusion was reached following investigations conducted by multiple agencies. The ministry said that studies conducted by the Indian Council of Medical Research, ICMR, and the National Center for Disease Control, NCDC, found no major changes in the patterns of causes of death when compared to previous years. In the majority of unexplained cases, genetic mutations were found to be the likely contributing factor. To investigate the phenomenon, two complementary studies were undertaken. The first one was conducted by the ICMR's National Institute of Epidemiology and was called a retrospective multicentric matched case control study. The second study, titled Establishing the Cause in Sudden Unexplained Deaths in Young, is a prospective investigation currently underway at the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, New Delhi. The study is being conducted in collaboration with the ICMR, and preliminary findings from the study suggest that myocardial infarction, that is heart attack, continues to be the leading cause of sudden death in this demographic. Moving on to the next news. Here, researchers sequence whole genome of ancient Egyptian for the first time. Researchers have sequenced the first whole ancient Egyptian genome from an individual who lived approximately 4,800 years ago. So the individual was approximately 4,800 years ago, and this is the oldest DNA sample from Egypt to date. So the body belongs to an adult male who died during Egypt's Old Kingdom. And the researchers have discovered that ancient Egyptians had brown eyes, brown hair, skin pigmentation ranging from dark to black skin, that is an intermediate skin color, and was 157 to 160 centimeter tall and lived up to the age of 44 to 64 years. Genetic results showed that a majority of the individuals' ancestry, about 78%, hails from the ancient North African population, specifically from Neolithic groups from present-day Morocco. About 22% of this man's DNA is a close match to early farmers from Mesopotamia, that is present-day Iraq, western Iran, southern Syria, and southeast Turkey, one of the Eastern Fertile Crescent. About 22% of the genetic makeup of the individual suggests historical cultural exchanges and interactions between Egyptian and Eastern Fertile Crescent. Though this Neolithic Mesopotamian connection is evident, the authors are quick to point out that this heritage may not have been direct. The DNA was successfully extracted from the individual's teeth. The overall climate of Egypt being hot, a key factor for long-term DNA preservation is the stability of the temperature. The DNA samples from the teeth root tips. The root tips get locked into the lower jaw, which might have helped preserve the DNA. That kind of dental tissue is very good for DNA preservation. Union government to gather support to remove Justice 𝗗𝗂𝘆𝘆. With the monsoon session of Parliament scheduled from July 21, the centre is set to begin the process of collecting signatures for a motion seeking the removal of Allahabad High Court Judge Justice 𝗗𝗂𝘆𝘆 over the discovery of burnt currency notes at his official residence. Several major political parties have expressed their willingness in principle to support the initiative. Union Parliamentary Affairs Minister Kiran Rijiju on Thursday said that while the process of obtaining signatures would commence shortly, a decision was yet to be taken on whether the motion would be introduced in the Lok Sabha or the Rajya Sabha. Support of a minimum of 100 members are required for the Lok Sabha and at least 50 members for the Rajya Sabha for such a motion to be admitted. Even if the motion is introduced during the upcoming session, it is unlikely to reach a conclusion within the same period. Under the Judges Inquiry Act 1968, once a motion for the removal of judges admitted in either house, the presiding officer is required to constitute a 3-member committee composed of a Supreme Court judge, a High Court Chief Justice, and a distinguished jurist to investigate the matter and submit a report within 3 months. So from this article's perspective, it becomes important to note how a judge is impeached or removed and what are the constitutional provisions. So procedure for removal of judges, it is mentioned under Articles 124 and 218. Judges of the Supreme Court and High Courts can be removed by the President on grounds of proven misbehavior or incapacity. The constitutional authority to remove a judge rests solely with the Parliament. To remove this, a resolution must be passed by both houses of Parliament, that too a majority of the total membership of the House, a special majority of not less than two-thirds of the members present and voting at the same session. The words proven misbehavior and incapacity are not defined in the Constitution. Misconduct, as interpreted by the Supreme Court, includes willful misconduct, corruption, lack of integrity, and moral degeneracy. Incapacity refers to a physical or mental condition that impedes judicial functioning. So, as we saw earlier, the committee, which will be constituted by Parliament, which includes a Supreme Court judge, a High Court Chief Justice, and an eminent jurist, the committee will investigate the allegations, and if the judge is acquitted, the motion is dismissed. If found guilty, then the committee report is sent to the Parliament for voting. And about the parliamentary approval for the President, parliamentary approval is required for the President to remove a judge. Both the houses will have to pass a resolution with a special majority. Endocrine disruptors and plastic waste, a new public health threat. So plastic pollution is no longer a distant environmental concern. It is a biological invasion with profound implications for human health. Infiltration of microplastics and plastic-derived EDCs. What are EDCs? They are endocrine disrupting chemicals into human bodies is triggering hormonal disruption, reproductive dysfunction, and chronic diseases. Once considered inert pollutants, especially the microplastics, that are the plastic particles smaller than 5 millimeter, are now recognized as biologically active. So further, a 2024 study reported the presence of microplastics in nearly 89% of blood samples in India, which is humongous number, which should raise concern and which is a cause of concern. Animal studies showed that even low doses of polystyrene microplastics disrupted testosterone levels, impaired sperm production, and damaged the blood testis barrier. Similar effects were observed in ovaries, where microplastics reduced anti-Mullerian hormone levels, triggered oxidative stress pathways, and induced cell death. The health burden associated with endocrine disrupting chemicals in India is staggering, costing over 25,000 crore annually due to increased healthcare spending and lost productivity. This silent epidemic must be addressed through science-driven regulation, robust monitoring, public education, and systemic change. Moving on to the last news. Here you can see a picture. The poorest population often living near waste dumps or working in informal recycling sector or even in manual scavenging bear the brunt of the plastic waste crisis. So here is the last article. Can the Supreme Court halt an act passed by a state? So we are looking at a Supreme Court mandate in the Nandini Sundar and others versus State of Chhattisgarh, a case pertaining to July 5, 2011. So the Supreme Court on July 5, 2011 issued an order stating that the state of Chhattisgarh shall cease and desist from using special police officers in any activities directly or indirectly aimed at controlling, countering, mitigating, or even eliminating Maoist activities. The court concluded that the appointment of inadvertently paid and ill-trained special police officers engaged in checking Maoism was violative of Article 14 and Article 21 of the Constitution. So why was a contempt case filed against this? Consequent to the Supreme Court order of July 2011, the state of Chhattisgarh enacted the Chhattisgarh Auxiliary Armed Police Forces Act 2011. In that, especially Section 4, Clause 1 of the Act provides that an auxiliary force shall be constituted to aid and assist the security forces in the maintenance of public order and preventing and combating Maoist or Naxal violence and insurgency. Of the same Act, Section 5, Clause 2 further stated that the members of the auxiliary force shall not be deployed in frontline positions of an operation and shall always work under supervision of the security forces. However, it was argued by the petitioners that the said enactment was not in consonance with the court's order and therefore amounted to contempt of the court. Why was this contempt prayer rejected by the Supreme Court? The reasons for rejecting the relief sought by petitioners. First one was that the Supreme Court took cognizance of the fact that all the directions issued by the court had been complied to by the state of Chhattisgarh and necessary reports were submitted. And the second reason was that the court said that every state legislature has plenary powers to pass an enactment so long as the said enactment was not declared to be ultra vires of the Constitution. So what is the meaning of ultra vires? Ultra vires means acting beyond one's legal power or authority. So any law made by Parliament or a state legislature cannot be held as an act of contempt. The court clarified that a legislature has the power to pass a law to remove the basis of a judgment or validate a law which has been struck down by constitutional court. This is the core of doctrine of separation of powers and must always be acknowledged in a constitutional democracy. So any piece of legislation enacted by a legislature can be curtailed only on the twin points of legislative competence or constitutional validity. In Indian Aluminium versus State of Kerala, a case in 1996, the Supreme Court observed that the courts must maintain the delicate balance devised by the Constitution between the three sovereign functionaries, that is the legislature, executive, and judiciary. The court therefore held that unless and until it is first established that the statute so enacted is in opposition to constitutional law or otherwise, it cannot be struck down. So here in the beginning, I have put a picture of the Amarnath Yatra. As you can see in the picture, first batch of Amarnath pilgrims has begun their journey from Jammu and Kashmir. With this, we wind up today's session. I hope it was useful. Please do comment below your suggestions. Thank you. Have a nice day.